2.3. Deriving long-run or potential GDP. The long-run or potential GDP, YP, is the level of GDP or output that a country can produce when all of its factors of production, the inputs, are used to their optimum capacity. This would mean, for example, workers would like to work 35 hours a week. Most workers get jobs to work 35 hours a week. Or machines that are designed by engineers are supposed to work optimally for 12 hours a day. And let us suppose there's enough demand for firms to run the machines for 12 hours a day. If that is the case, we are producing what we're supposed to, or the potential GDP. Actual unemployment rate associated with potential GDP, we call that the natural rate of unemployment. For Canada, it is around 6% to 7.5%. I'll just round it off to around 7% or so. Let us recall, what is the unemployment rate defined as? Unemployment is defined as the labor force minus people who have jobs, employment, divided by the labor force times 100. The natural rate of unemployment, even when the economy is producing what it is supposed to be doing, the unemployment rate is never equal to zero. And why is that the case? Recall that from before. Unemployment rates, we have frictional unemployment, which always exists. People do not like their jobs, do not like their bosses, they want to find a new one. Or because of seasonal changes, summer versus Christmas, or because of structural changes, technological changes. These three types of unemployment will always exist regardless of how well the economy is doing, and we would call this the natural unemployment. And all of these three types together for Canada would explain the somewhere 6% to 7% natural unemployment rate. In general, we observe that the actual unemployment rate that we have is bigger than, let us take the midpoint, 6.5%, the natural rate. We tend to say that we have a recession because it's very hard for people to find jobs. If the actual unemployment rate is less than the 6.5, the economy is booming, very easy to find jobs, we would call this an economic boom. How is this possible? It could be because people working two jobs or working extra hours, overtime. Most of the time, an economic boom, if it is driven by workers working extra hours, tend to be temporary. Because sooner or later, workers would get tired, they want to spend more time on leisure. Output gaps. If the actual short-run GDP is not equal to the long-run potential GDP, we have an output gap. Output gap by definition is the actual short-run GDP minus the potential GDP divided by the potential GDP times 100. This would give us the gap in the form of a percent. Output gaps can be positive or negative. For example, the actual GDP is bigger than potential GDP. We enter into an economic boom, therefore we have an inflationary gap. How is it possible that we produce more than what we normally could? Because more people are working, or easier to find jobs, unemployment rate should be lower than the 6.5 or 6% to 7% natural rate. In the time period of 2005 to 2007, this was a time period where we have the actual unemployment rate to be less than the 6.5%, sometimes 5 point something percent, sometimes 6%, and this was the time period where we had an inflationary gap. The opposite could also be true. Actual GDP less than our potential GDP. We are producing less than what we are capable of, which means we are in a recession. In a recession, much harder for people to find jobs, firms produce less, actual unemployment rate will be higher than the natural rate. This would mean if you look at the period of late 2008 to around, say, 2010, actual unemployment rate was around 8% or so, depending on which time period you look at, and that was bigger than the 6.5% natural rate. If we do observe that the actual GDP is equal to potential GDP, we call this full employment GDP. That means our actual unemployment rate would have to be equal to the natural rate. And for Canada, this is somewhere around 6.5%. If we could, we would like the economy to be operating under potential GDP equal to actual GDP, or we would like our actual unemployment rate to be close to 6.5% or so. This would mean we can eliminate or prevent ups and downs or fluctuations or volatility in the economy. What is the shape of the long-run aggregate supply curve? In the long run, remember, by definition, input prices, production costs, and goods prices, the output that the firms produce and sell for, both prices are flexible. Wage contracts that we previously signed are up for renewal, therefore wages can change. Let us start in the short run. Price on the vertical axis, output on the horizontal axis. To begin with, let us suppose we have this Y0, short-run GDP, equal to my potential GDP, and this is with the initial price level, for example, the base year, consumer price index, or GDP deflator. Let's call this point A. Suppose in the short run, the price has increased for whatever reason. This would mean with wages still fixed because the contract has been signed for a year, we are 6 months into the contract. Input costs still the same. The price of the output has increased. This will increase the profits for the firms. As a result, very likely, firms will not stay at point A. It will go to, say, point B. We would now have a short-run economic boom. The firms cannot stay at point B forever, though, because workers know at point B, the price level has increased or the cost of living have increased. When the wage contract expires and could be renewed, what are workers going to do? They would ask for a nominal wage increase, how much they get paid in dollars, to match at least the increase in the cost of living. If the firms disagree, workers can go on strike, go picket. Towards the end, all of this disruption will be resolved and wage increase will be proportional to the price increase or to the inflation rate. What would this mean? Firms looking at the price of the output, let's suppose, has increased by 5%. Wages, input costs has also increased by 5%. Both of this together would have no effect on my profits. Then the firms will go back to, the price level has increased. The firm will just go back to hiring the initial amount of workers, producing the initial amount of output. This is supposed to be a straight line. And this is how we can get the long-run aggregate supply curve. Therefore, we can conclude that the long-run aggregate supply curve is vertical. An increase in the price could increase profits in the short run. However, increase in the price would lead to workers asking for higher wages, which increase production costs. Towards the end, the two would just offset each other. The firms would produce exactly the same amount, which is the YP. In other words, price changes cannot affect output level. With this low price, we have low wage. With this high price, we have high wage. Any price level will give us exactly the same output level. How does the long-run aggregate supply curve shift? Only if we have some real changes. What do we mean by real changes? Suppose we have a bigger labor force, more people working, or same number of people working, but they get to work with more capital, equipment, machinery, tools, or they have the same tools, but better tools. If that is the case, long-run aggregate supply curve, if it is an improvement, will shift towards the right. If it is a natural calamity that destroys some capital stock, it could shift towards the origin. We can now conclude that in the long run, the only way the economy can produce more is because of labor force changes, capital stock changes, or technological improvements, or the economy may produce less because of the destruction of labor force, capital stock, probably less likely in terms of technology moving backwards. So long-run aggregate supply captures the real changes in inputs and production methods.